As I said, I'm going to start off with Obsidian, which is the base of the Northern Lights glaze combination. And before I start glazing, I always make sure to stir my glazes very well. Then this is the brush that I like to use. It's a big fan brush. I like how wide it is because this just makes the glazing go quite fast and also makes it easy to apply the glaze with an even thickness. And then I start applying this glaze. I apply 3 coats of Obsidian onto every piece that I'm going to do. And I personally like to start off with the inside of the mug. So I make a circular motion and I start at the bottom and then I glaze the inside all the way up to the rim, and then I like to glaze the top part of the mug on the outside, as you can see. This way it's easy for me to hold it while glazing it, and then I also immediately glaze the handle. And while I was glazing the handle, the top part of the mug had already dried enough for me to be able to hold it there. So I just hold it at the top and then I glaze the bottom part, and that is how I apply a coat all over a mug. It's important to let the glaze dry in between coats, and you can just let it rest for some time before it's dry, but sometimes I just like to speed up the drying process with a heat gun. So if you have a heat gun, you can just use this. I apply 2 more coats, so I apply 3 coats on all of the mugs. I've also tried this with just 2 coats, but when I just apply 2 coats of Obsidian, you can still see the clay through the glaze a little bit. And I like it to be very dark and very black and not see-through, so that's why I always apply 3 coats. And then when I've applied Obsidian to all of the mugs, it's time to start using some color. So I first, of course, stir all of the glazes, which is very important, don't forget that. The first glaze that I'm going to use for the first combination will be Indigo Float. So I grab a fan brush again. This one is a little bit smaller than the previous one, but just depending on how wide you want to make the strokes, you can just take like a bigger or smaller brush. Just like this, I apply an even coat of this glaze on the top part of the mug, and as you can see, I leave a little part unglazed at the rim so that you can still see the Obsidian there at the top. I just like the look of that, but you could also glaze all the way up to the top. I'm sorry, my camera was out of focus for a second, and I glaze a little bit further down than halfway. And then I also apply some glaze at the handle. I personally like to glaze half the handle with this color, and then when we're moving over to the other color, glaze the other half. But you can also, of course, just design this in any way you'd like, but this is what I always go for. Then it's important to let it dry again, because you always have to let it dry in between coats. So I tried it again with my heat gun, and this time I did that on top of a turning table so that I wouldn't burn my hands. Maybe you should just always do that and not hold it in your hands, because the heat gun can get very warm. And then I apply a second coat of Indigo Float onto the mug, as you can see here, just at the same part. And I'm now applying it a little bit thicker than the previous coat. I always make the first coat a little bit thinner, because then I'm just like figuring out where I want to glaze it and where I want to put the glaze. And with the second coat I already know that, and then it's a little bit easier to apply it a little bit thicker. I don't know if that makes sense, but it is how it works for me. But it's just important to not apply the colors too thin, because otherwise it will just melt too much into the black glaze and your mug will come out quite dark. So I personally would go for a little bit of a thicker layer, especially with the second coat. And then with the second coat, this color is already finished, because I just applied 2 coats and not 3. Otherwise it's just a lot of work, and 2 is enough if you don't apply it too thin. And then after drying the cup again, I start applying the last color of this mug, which is Smoky Mellow. And I'm now applying this on the bottom half of the mug, as you see, with a wide stroke. And as you can see, I overlay a part of the previous glaze, and I also brush it down further down onto the mug, if that makes sense. So later on, when this mug is finished, you will actually be seeing 3 different colors, which is going to be the Indigo Float at the top. Then you have a part where the 2 glazes are on top of each other, which will give a special color. And then at the bottom you will see just the Smoke Mellow on top of the Obsidian, which will also look really nice. And on the handle, I personally like to glaze the other half of the handle and also overlay it at the top so that it melts into each other a little bit there. And then after drying it again, I apply a second coat, which is also a little bit of a thicker coat, just so that the glaze isn't too thin. And then this mug is finished, and after it has dried, I can put it into the kiln. And this is the final result of this mug. So as you can see, you see the nice blue on top. Then you see like a mixture of the purple and the blue in the middle. And then at the bottom you see a stroke of Smoky Mellow as well. And as you can see, I personally really like the black line at the top as well, and also a little bit of black at the bottom. And yeah, in my opinion, this looks really cool. So I hope you like it too.